your way.
No, you're good. I love this fifth story.
Hello. Hello. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, lovely. Okay. My name is Catherine Bresner. I have the honor of being the publicist for Wave Books. I also have the distinct honor of introducing two of my favorite writers for me personally, and two writers who have impacted my own sense of poetics greatly. But before I begin, I just want to do a housekeeping announcements. First, I would just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for hosting these poets. Thank you, Grolier. And also, if you could please silence your cell phones, that would be much appreciated. And then, although they're always listening, and then if you need to use the bathroom, there's a place.
The Harvard Smith Center.
The Harvard Smith Center and Tatem. Sorry, I was like, is it Tatem? No, it's Tatem. Tatem. Thank you. Okay. So I just want to first we're gonna have a reading from Isaac Jarnot and then also Srikanth Reddy, aka Chiku. Just a few words about Isaac. Isaac, for me, I discovered Isaac's work through a poetry class. I think it might have been Peter Gizzi's class at UMass Amherst. I was an undergrad baby poet, and he introduced me to Ring of Fire, which was just, heartbreakingly beautiful and amazing and life-changing. And if you haven't read it, do it. I bet you they have a copy here. Also, I heard it's bad luck if you go into a bookstore and don't buy a book, so you're gonna do that. And then also, I have to say, I read with my love, the poet and bookseller Adam Tobin. We read your poem, A Princess, a Magic Presto Spell, behind this beautiful glacier erratic right behind our house. So these poets are like talismanic for me. It's a very big honor to introduce them. So this is Isaac's bio. Isaac Jarnot was born in Buffalo, New York, and educated at the State University of New York at Buffalo. He is the author of several collections of poetry, as well as the Bagley Wright Lecture Series book, 4 Lectures, which just came out from Wave, and The Ambassador from Venus, a biography of the San Francisco poet Robert Duncan. He has been a visiting professor at Naropa University, Brooklyn College, the University of Colorado, Boulder. He lives in Jackson Heights, Queens, holds a Masters of Divinity degree from New York Theological Seminary, is a PhD student in theology at Drew University, and is a minister at Safe Haven United Church of Christ. So that's Isaac. And let me just say a few words about Chiku, who is just, I was listening to the lectures from this book on the way down here, and I was thinking about the ways that Chiku has, transformed my sense of attention to the things around me in the same ways that kind of Tisa Bryant does about paying attention to the periphery, and my relationship to Emily Dickinson and her as a white woman and being aware of one's kind of gaze and attention. Chiku, I started working with Chiku with Underworld Lit when it came out in 2020, which is a, banner year. And, almost 5 years later, it's such a beautiful pleasure to welcome this book into the world. So let me just do the formal thing and also read his bio. So Srikanth Reddy's latest books include the Bagley Wright lecture book, The Unsignificant from Wave, and his first book of poetry, Underworld Lit, Wave Books in 2020, which was a finalist for the Griffin International Poetry Prize, the Poetry Society of America T.S. Eliot's for Quartets Prize, and a Times Literary Supplement Book of the Year for 2020. His writing has appeared in Harper's, The Guardian, The New York Times, The Washington Post. He is currently the poetry editor of the Paris Review and co-editor of the Phoenix Poets book series at the University of Chicago Press. The recipient of fellowships from the Creative Capital Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts, Reddy is a professor of English and creative writing at the University of Chicago. Please help me welcome first Isaac, then Srikanth Reddy.
Thank you, Catherine. I guess we need the mic. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's fantastic to be here. I had the feeling on the train up, the question, why do we do this? Poets, writers, why do we, that weird lonely feeling you get when you're heading somewhere and you're like, what's gonna happen? But then this happens, right? And I see this guy who I haven't seen for a long time and everyone here. So I'm just delighted. And I'm going to read a little bit from the Wave lectures, and then I'm going to read a few poems. So I will have done my job, right? So yeah, I think that part of the answer to the question, why do we do this? Really comes to me in this, I just thought walking over here of that, line of Allen Ginsberg's to ease the pain of living. So I wanted to, pay attention to kind of ancestors. And I'm going to read from this first talk in this book, which is called White Men, White Whales, and Whitehead. And particularly because it focuses a bit on Bob Creeley, who is buried down the street at Mount Auburn Cemetery. So he's very much on my mind today. And I've been told between 15 and 25 minutes, so I'm going to stop talking extraneously. Okay, 7, 10. So this begins with this quote from George Herbert: "The shepherds are honest people, let them sing." When I think about what my tradition is, which we might call an American experimental or open verse poetry, originating out of Whitman and Dickinson, and before that, on the other side of the ocean, out of William Blake, I know for me it has always been populated with white men, white whales, as in Melville's in the novel Moby Dick, and Whitehead, as in Alfred North Whitehead, and his cosmological treatise, Process and Reality, 1929. This might seem like a seriously complicated barrel of monkeys, and I think it is, yes. But I'd like to frame it as something to explore and to be curious about tonight. It seems to me that the inspiration behind poems is often a feeling that something is desperately wrong or that something is desperately right. And out of one or the other of these emergencies, something must be said, which leads to the rant or elegy about the desperately wrong thing, or to the ode or love poem about the desperately right thing. My specific context of being of European descent and from a working class family, assigned female at birth, and a local yokel citizen of the United States, led me to the extremes of these feelings, to both poles. it was mostly that by the time I was in elementary school, I knew that something was desperately wrong on the local temporal level of what I'll call God and country and shopping mall. And then simultaneously, that something was desperately right on an eternal level, that there was an order somewhere around me in nature that was both unifying and liberating, which is what I would later come to find expressed by Melville and Whitehead. When I was in my mid-teens, I spent a lot of time playing a tennis racket air guitar in my brother's bedroom and listening to records that we'd managed to pick up at the department store down on Route 5. It was an accident or incident or flash of novelty, as Alfred North Whitehead might call it, around my air guitar jam sessions that tipped me off to the constellation of prophetic voices that included Allen Ginsberg. And it began when I came across an elegy called Ballad of Hollis Brown, in which the author, Bob Dylan, at the age of 22, pinned down a picture of something that is desperately wrong. And I remember seeing Dylan perform that ballad on television in 1984 or 1985 with his typical hard to follow phrasings that caused one of my family members to blurt out, "Well, that was really terrible." But somehow I had absorbed, if not every word of it, every ounce of the pathos of it. The song was not based in historical fact. It's a story about a farmer in South Dakota who is starving, and in desperation, he loads his shotgun, blows out the brains of his wife and 5 children, and then kills himself. And I found myself running off to my room to make notes about how incredibly transcendent it had been to hear this, how viscerally moved I was, at which point I think I really felt deeply that poetry, on the level that Dylan was presenting it as a prophetic art, was a matter of life and death, and also that I was not going to be able to turn away from that, I was not going to be able to turn away from participating in it. I want to define what I mean by a prophetic art, because I think that phrase can feel unapproachable, and it can definitely be misunderstood as some kind of hocus pocus that involves crystal balls. My definition of a prophetic art is informed by the writing of Old Testament scholar and theologian Walter Brueggemann. A prophetic art is an art that points out a difficulty in a present moment, relates it to a previous failing within a social contract, and gives the listener options for potentially good or bad outcomes. Another way to say this is that a prophetic art is one in which the prophet is attuned to a higher order of things. Some might call it God, and some people might call it ethics or common decency. Spinoza makes it simple, defining a prophet as one who interprets the revelations of God, and adding that the power of prophecy implies not a perfect mind, but a vivid imagination. What was haunting about the Bob Dylan ballad was the acknowledgement of that despair embedded in the American landscape. And implied in that was the despair of what Brueggemann identifies as democratic capitalism and militant consumerism. And back of that, yes, the doctrine of discovery, colonialism, and slavery, which for me as a white teenager were the more invisible parts of the problem. Dylan's ballad reminded me that through an ethos of American individualism, some people are going to perish and some people are going to thrive. And for the most part, few people are going to say a word about it. And even fewer people are going to act to change things. I still feel haunted in the same way by the opening of the second section of Ginsberg's Howl, the Moloch section. What sphinx of cement and aluminum bashed open their skulls and ate up their brains and imagination? Moloch, solitude, filth, ugliness, ash cans, and unobtainable dollars. Children screaming under the stairways, boys sobbing in armies, old men weeping in the parks. Moloch, Moloch, nightmare of Moloch, Moloch the loveless, mental Moloch, Moloch the heavy judger of men, Moloch the incomprehensible prison, Moloch the cross-boned, soulless jailhouse and congress of sorrows, Moloch, whose buildings are judgment, Moloch, the vast stone of war. I'm going to skip ahead to this little section on, yes, okay. I just skipped a little bit about Melville and the Pequod, the boat, right? So that's so you know where we are. I went to sea in a way I didn't expect to, and my Pequod was a community within the University of Buffalo, a small band of Ishmaels working for Ahab's. The most important of these Ishmaels for me were two white male poets, Robert Creeley and John or Jack Clark. I should say, I should just say that the really interesting thing for me about this talk is that I wrote it about these distant white guys, and then I came out as a white guy. I was like, oh, so when I read it now, I'm like, oh, it feels different. They were both in the English department, though I don't think that either of them felt that they particularly belonged there. So yes, 1987, 1986, I guess I started studying with Bob Creeley and Jack Clark. I don't think that either of them felt they particularly belonged in the English department, and they were both disheveled in the way that Ishmael's shipmates were in Moby Dick. They were also both heirs to that experimental American tradition that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. Bob was a New Englander, a Harvard dropout, a poet of the lineage and stature of Dickinson and Williams. I guess I'd have to describe Jack Clark as a Midwestern polymath. In addition to being a poet, he was a jazz musician and Blake scholar. And in his first years on the faculty at Buffalo, he had met the poet Charles Olson, and they became fast friends. Neither Bob nor Jack were mentors in any conventional sense. Bob was at his best with people as a friend, and he always craved what he would call a down-home sociality. He had very little interest in assuming any mantle of authority. Jack was definitely something other than a college professor, though he hid it well under his tweed jacket and owl-like glasses and goatee. I knew when the tide turned for me exactly when I realized that I could get something out of the academy on an afternoon as I listened to Jack Clark enter into a conversation with a student, one of those Long Island football jocks. And Jack suggested that he might understand the reading material, Hesiod, better if he took psychedelic mushrooms. As for Bob Creeley, I remember working up the courage to introduce myself to him on the first day of classes and saying, I'm going to sign up for a poetry writing workshop and write poems. And he was really opposed to this idea. In a gentle, brotherly way, he suggested that perhaps if I wanted to be a poet, I could study languages and history. What I learned quickly about Jack and Bob is that they were thoroughly disinterested in poetry as a commodity, and they were disinterested in forcing poems into existence. Simultaneously, they were entirely committed to breaking down and maneuvering around any form, prosodic, academic, social, that restricted freedom, which is why I'm so willing to configure them using our contemporary cultural jargon as allies. If a straight-laced poet like Robert Frost or anyone out of the line of the new critics was mentioned in conversation, Bob and Jack would simply fume about the travesty of their tedious closed systems, a sentiment which put them at odds with most of the rest of the English department. In my earnest romanticism, they confirmed what I suspected, that the retreat of the poem into academic institutions was the death of the prophetic tradition. I remember a young, very slick poet coming through town one autumn and Jack and Bob deliberating with each other about his work and Jack chewing on his lip and wrinkling his brow and saying, well, he could go either way. I still carry that with me to a fault sometimes, because I do have friends who can stomach certain kinds of poems and poets. And I think to myself, if you want something like that, you do just as well to go to Pottery Barn and look at the furniture. I know the first time I read that, I got angry comments in the Zoom. That's mean. Sorry. It was an I statement. That's how I feel. In the same way that Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg had employed an earnest prophetic content, the writers I came to know through Bob and Jack employed an earnest prophetic form. They gave me an understanding that received systems are meant to be interrogated, opened, and rearranged. They showed me a world on the page that in no way resembled what I had seen in respectable literature anthologies. To break with a poetic formalism implied breaking with acceptable social behavior and acceptable social alliances. It meant crossing color lines. Bob's rhythm as a poet came not just out of William Carlos Williams, but out of Max Roach. The prophetic tendency was often subtle in the content of Bob's work, but not always. I think of his poem, America. America you owed for reality. Give back the people you took. Let the sun shine again on the four corners of the world. On the four corners of the world you thought of first, but do not own or keep like a convenience. People are your own word. You invented that locus and term. Here, you said and say, is where we are. Give back what we are, these people you made, us, and nowhere but you to be. So pretty. I love that piece. Let me check this. Okay. William Blake's etching plates and Whitman's barbaric yawping stanzas and Olson and Robert Duncan's field theory all prophetically rebelled against what was wrong with the world. I'm read a tiny bit more here because I've got to get a little bit of the Duncan in here to explain my Neoplatonism. Duncan habitually explained that in his poems, Duncan habitually explained this, what was wrong with the world in his poems. His anarchist disdain for polite order and his love affair with the idea that creative work had a life force and his creative idea, starting that over. Duncan habitually explained this in his poems. His anarchist disdain for polite order and his love affair with the idea that creative work had a life force that made it a living part of the universe. It took me a long time to understand that what he was writing about in his first full-length collection, The Opening of the Field, is the same thing that Walter Brueggemann is talking about when he describes a prophetic ministry as one that upends the questions of right or left-wing politics. Duncan flat out rejects what he calls man-made laws, including the Constitution of the United States. Seeking a law with a capital L, that's also very Platonic. I don't know if he's fixed anything there. With a capital L, and an evolving order of the universe absolutely aligned with Alfred North Whitehead's thinking. The Law I Love is Major Mover is a poem written by Duncan in the midst of his obsession with Whitehead's process and reality. Here, beautiful damned man that lays down his law, lays down himself, creates hell, a sentence unfolding, healthy heaven. Thou wilt not allow the suns to move, nor man to mean desire move. Look, the angel that made a man of Jacob made Israel in his embrace. Was the law, was syntax. Him I love is major mover. That major mover, that prime mover, that eternal law actually doesn't belong to the church. Though Duncan's integration of Judeo-Christian myth here may give a false sense of such an alignment, and it doesn't belong to the state. There's a touch of Spinoza here as well, who in his theological political treatise makes the same distinction between human law and divine law, dismissing human law as a plan of living which serves only to render the state secure. Duncan's major mover, his God, is glimpsed through the creative processes of the poem and of the universe. There's something that the poet Don Bird told me when I was writing the Duncan biography about a reading Duncan gave of his Passages poems in Kansas in 1969. This would have been one of the readings where Duncan fully denounced what he saw as a literal Satanism in the American occupation of Vietnam. Don Bird said, somewhere in the midst of one of the apocalyptic passages, Duncan stopped and said, sometimes people ask me why, if I believe this, right, if I believe in this literal Satanism in the American occupation of Vietnam, why do I bother to write poetry? I write for the fucking stars. So that's a bit of that. I'm just going to read a couple of poems. I opened tons of threads that lecture was going in, and I didn't close any of them. So sorry. You're on your own, but you can buy the book. See, I did my job. Okay. Oh yeah. All right. I'm actually gonna read. I'm just gonna read one poem. And I'm gonna read one poem that I wrote on a train between New York and Boston so long ago. Maybe like 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. I mean, not long in the scale of life on Earth, but long in the scale of my life. It's called Brooklyn Anchorage. And at noon I will fall in love, and nothing will have meaning except for the brownness of the sky and tradition and water. And in the water off the railway in New Haven, all the lights go on across the sun. And for millennia, those who kiss fall into hospitals, riding trains, wearing black shoes, pursued by those they love, the Chinese in the armies with the shiny sound of Johnny Cash. And in my plan to be myself, I became someone else with soft lips and a secret life. And I left from an airport in tradition of the water on the plains until the train started moving. And yesterday it seemed true that suddenly inside of the newspaper, there was a power line and my heart stopped and everything leaned down from the sky to kill me. And now the cattails sing. Thank you.
Thanks, Isaac. That was so great. And it's really awesome to be here with you after what feels like a long time. Maybe not in geological time, but yeah. And it also feels like a long time because this is where I had my first job in college, this bookstore. And I was undergraduate. My dorm was just across Mass Ave, right here. And I spent a lot of time looking at the books on these shelves, shelving books on these shelves, wrapping them up to be shipped, being told I wasn't sufficiently alert to shoplifters. And so it's great to see the store still up and running, thanks to people like you, James, and thank you, Catherine and Isaac and everyone. And I was thinking, you were saying, Isaac, like coming out here, thinking to yourself, like, why do we do this? And I think everyone asks themselves that before they get in front of a crowd to, talk about poetry or read poems. And I think one really nice thing about tonight is walking in here and seeing that I have more friends than I thought I had. And I think that's probably something about poetry that makes you realize that some of those friends you may not even know yet. But thanks all for being here. I'm going to read some, maybe I'll start with, I'll do maybe the flip side. I'll read more poems and then a little bit of this lecture book, because the lecture book is full of pictures. And so there's just very few passages that I can read that make sense without having giant images on screen. And, because this is where I was a student, and I can't help thinking about, being a student, being here. I thought I'd read from this last book of poetry. Now I'm a teacher, and so maybe this will cause me to feel even more vertigo. So these are, I'll hop around a little bit from my last book of poetry with Wave, Underworld Lit. I'll read the numbers, even though it doesn't make sense to do that, really. 16. A student visited my office the day before yesterday with some questions concerning her midterm exam. Apparently, I'd been a little dismissive of her worldview in my comments. As the conversation wore on, I found myself explaining that it would have been physically impossible for Dante to crawl through the center of the Earth, because as everybody knows, the planet's core is very hot. But he went all the way through and saw the stars again, the girl insisted. Are you calling him a liar? She had been homeschooled in a rural area downstate and occasionally required some additional learning support on my part. Once more, I tried to explain that nobody could pass through the world and come out the other side. It would be metaphysically implausible. Studying a loose tile on the ceiling, my visitor, whose name regrettably escapes me, seemed unconvinced. When I get to heaven, she rose suddenly to go, her face flushed. I will ask Dante. Classes were letting out for the day. The antiquated street lamps had begun to flicker on, one by one, across the main quad. Consulting my watch, I worried that I might be late for my appointment. And what if he ended up in the other place? I inquired, showing the girl out the door. Then you ask him. 3. For the past several years, I've taught an introductory course on world literature at the university where I'm presently employed. The offering has frequently proven to be a disappointment, both to myself and to the students, some in headscarves, some occasionally dressed in fatigues, who register for this seminar in order to satisfy their humanities requirement. As far as classes go, it was an almost painless experience. The instructor is fairly intelligent and enthusiastic about the material, but is unreceptive, even intolerant of anything that is not a poem, or a poem in prose form. That one's real, by the way. Made me question things, including the value of higher learning. Looking over the feedback last summer, I began to consider a different approach. There would be new assignments, self-assessments, and regularly scheduled office hours this time around, followed by a transitional withdrawal of black gowns through the spring morning mist. And because I know comparatively little of this world, I've decided to work my way up from below. Hume 101, Introduction to the Underworld. cross-listed with divinity and complet. In this course, students will be ferried across the river of sorrow, subsist on a diet of clay, weigh their hearts against a feather on the infernal balance, and ascend a viewing pagoda in order to gaze upon their homelands until emptied of all emotion. Texts will include the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Mayan Book of the Dead, the Ethiopian Book of the Dead, and Muriel Rukeyser's Book of the Dead. The goals of the seminar are to introduce students to the posthumous disciplinary regimes of various cultures, and to help them develop the communication skills that are crucial for success in today's global marketplace. All readings in English. Requirements include the death of the student, an oral report, and a final paper. 5. I promised my wife that I would call Dr. Song today. After putting Mira down for her nap and slipping outside for a smoke, I lifted the receiver. The sound it emitted, which I have heard without pause countless times before, seemed to me otherworldly now, like somebody's finger playing on the wet rim of a crystal bowl in a derelict theater before the wars. It's hard to say how long I stood there listening. It may have been seconds or seasons. The rings of Saturn kept turning in their groove. For reasons beyond me, our seminar had already moved on from late medieval Europe to developing world underworlds. I dialed 1-800-INFERNO, and before the first ring, a woman's voice answered in heavily accented English. Is it you? I think so, I replied. Outside, the honey locusts sprinkled their pale spinning leaves in real time. Focusing on one as it fell seemed to slow the general descent. O creature, gracious and good, the faraway lady recited, as if reading against her will from a prepared text, traversing the dusky element to visit us who stained the world with blood. I could hear rain trickling in a gutter spout on the other end of the line. Please, I said into the receiver, remove my name from your list. I'll read maybe one or two more. 6. While outlining the requirements for our first critical essay of the term, I noticed a hand rising in world historical time at the back of the classroom. What if I'm ideologically opposed to revision? Asks the red-headed boy in a New Slaves t-shirt. A city bus unloads its pageantry outside the window. A handful of sparrows erupts from the equestrian statue on the quad. I remember Sun Tzu's advice to humanities instructors, which I review on index cards at the outset of each academic quarter. Hold out baits to entice the enemy. Feign disorder and crush him. What exactly is your ideology? I ask, stroking my beard. I'm a Zen Naxalite crypto-objectivist, replies my interlocutor. How about you? I have no choice but to improvise. Pro-recycling? Anti-genocide? A voice from beyond my peripheral vision says, you're nothing but a pseudo-Kantian neoliberal mirage with meta-narcissistic tendencies. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Maybe I'll end with a quiz. A pop quiz. 14. Please print clearly and remember your name. 1. The river of fire in ancient Greek thanatopography feeds into the river of blank. 2. From the river of pain spring 2 rivers, the river of blank and the river of blank. 3. The river of blank runs a separate course entirely, concealed inside the Greek word for truth. 4. At the sight of sinners approaching, the blank seethes like butter in a frying pan. 5. Blank is the Sanskrit river of ash. 6. As the sun god Ra floats down the river of the hidden chamber, his head is exchanged for that of a blank. 7. Those for whom much lamentation is made find the blank swollen with tears and difficult to cross. 8. To our knowledge, the river of blank has no name. So I thought I'd read just a little bit from the end of this book. It's from the 3rd lecture, which is on wonder, the history of wonder in Western poetry, from Homer to Milton to Ronald Johnson. And I kind of thought maybe it would be apt to end thinking a little bit about Ronald Johnson, because I think of him as a prophetic poet in all kinds of ways, in the Blakean tradition that Isaac was kind of sharing with us today. And so maybe I'll say just a little thing or two about this particular poem, Radios. I don't think anyone really knows how to pronounce it. The title of the poem is an erasure of Milton's poem Paradise Lost. And I kind of came to this lecture because I had kind of an earworm from Ronald Johnson's poem, a line that went, "the O of wonder," and thinking, that's really beautiful, strange, seems pregnant with meaning, and eventually I went back to the Milton to see where Ronald Johnson had found the phrase, "the O of wonder." And it comes from the passage in Paradise Lost where Satan's shield is being described. And that kind of blew my mind, that Satan's shield, which is described as an image of the as having the moon emblazoned on it, was the source for Johnson of the O of wonder. And behind Satan's shield in Paradise Lost lies Achilles' shield in the Iliad, a shield that has the entire world on it, on its surface. So I think that kind of gives you a little bit of background for just the end of this lecture, which thinks a little bit about wonder and shields and war and poetry. A literary multiverse, Radios is riddled with cosmological wormholes, theological rabbit holes, and typographical holes. From the O tree, a slant rhyme for poetry that opens the work, to the O for the apocalypse that trumpets the poem's closing revelations, Johnson makes us see the whole in whole, W-H-O-L-E, and hear the whole in holy. There's a hole in wonder too, though I'd never tumbled through it until I came across the following page in Radios. And here's, thanks to Wave doing an incredible job with the book design, little facsimile of the original page. I don't know if you can see it all the way back there, but you can see it's mostly blank because Johnson just preserved some of Milton's language on each page. Maybe I'll read this page of Radios. A mind to be changed by place or lace, heaven of hell, astonished on the oblivious pool, the O of wonder. Circumference hung on shoulders like the moon, whose optic glass at evening from the top new globe of some great burning azure, vaulted. So in Milton's original, that's Satan having fallen for 9 days and 9 nights after the battle for heaven, picking himself up in the inferno and rallying his troops and putting on his shield to then wage war on Eden. The first time I read this passage, I had no idea what lay behind it. But that floating little phrase, the O of wonder, kept looping around my head. So I dug up an old copy of Paradise Lost to read the Miltonic original, and was wonderstruck. Almost 3,000 years ago, a blind Greek poet pictured the world on an ancient shield. 2.5 millennia later, the moon spied through an optic glass eclipsed Homer's world in a theological poem of Reformation England, Paradise Lost. In my own lifetime, I was 4. Astronauts had set foot on the moon's surface only a few years earlier. A little-known American poet erased Milton's spotty globe all the way down to wondrous O. World, moon, O. The word for when things line up in this way is a syzygy. The microscopic linkage of chromosomes necessary for reproduction in our species is one example. An eclipse, when 3 celestial bodies line up in astronomical space, is another. The word syzygy is itself a syzygy, which almost makes me believe in intelligent design as far as language is concerned. Read aloud its sequence of 3 identical vowels lined up in a row, Y, 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 and you'll hear humankind grappling with the mystery of causation. Let's not overlook that linked chain of O's in the O of wonder either. It's a syzygy too. Y, Y, Y. Oh, oh, oh. We all lived that song. So many images flicker through this O in Radios. A full moon, a ghostly shield, a hole in a page from a time-worn edition of Paradise Lost. But I always return to a mouth open in wonder. When we see golden acrobats turning handsprings on an ancient shield, or when the mountains of the moon first swim into focus through a telescope's eyepiece, we say, oh, hardly aware that our lips are assuming the shape of the signifier itself. The O of wonder, Johnson shows us, is the O in wonder. I can't think of any other word where our writing system and the morphology of human speech enter into such wondrous alignment. But the mouth forms an O in arousal, and in hunger, and in death's terminal rictus too. Thy mouth was open, George Herbert says to death personified, but thou couldst not sing. There's no such thing as pure or simple wonder. When thaumazein, the Greek word for wondering, forces our lips into an O, all those ancient drives, from Eros to Thanatos, move through us as well. The art of poetry traditionally originates in this inexhaustible, sonorous O. O Muse, O Lord, O my love, O late capitalism, O etc. The O that Johnson plucks out of wonder invokes endless poetic variation. With all due respect to Plato and Aristotle, who claimed that philosophy was the only vacation that springs from Thamazine, if you look closely at the O of wonder, you'll see a poem beginning there too.
Thank you, Catherine, for those wonderful introductions. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you, Chiku, for those wonderful readings. And thanks to all of you for coming this evening to support these wonderful people and this wonderful shop. If everyone could please put your folding chairs up against one of the walls, and we have some books for sale, and which will be signing books. Thank you so much. And Isaac has an event tomorrow at the Harvard Divinity School you should all go to at 5:30 p.m. So thank you very much.